Yeah, I think now there should come my presentation somehow. Yeah, and that's all of my presentation. There isn't something more. It's just the title, Graz in Times of Revolution, 1918, 1968 and 2018. I hope that you don't expect now some real hidden history, in the sense that you expect to hear some stories about revolutions you never heard of. And sorry, I can't give you that. And I think the last lecture of Herwig gave you a good introduction in the history of Austria and Styria and Graz. So you know where you are, and it's not a really revolutionary place. So the question is what I'm talking about now the next 25 minutes. What I want to do is to talk about this last almost 100 years, because the 20th century has been a century of revolutionary changes. So my question was, what happened in moments when the world turned upside down? What happened in these moments in a city like Graz, in a place or in a region like Styria? And I will take you on a ride through the history of the last 100 years, I would say. And I will make some stops in 1918, 1968, and we also will, or I want to make a stop in 2018. I think I will make these stops in very different episodes of history, because like 1918, it's a time of open struggle, of open conflict. 1968 is totally different. It's more a period of hidden, or forms of hidden resistance, and at the end we will see what is about 2018. I will start with 1918 for sure, and it's the first stop. If you talk to people here in Graz about their city, most of them wouldn't characterize their city, Graz, as an industrial city. So therefore, people don't see it as a city of the workers' movement. Yeah. Okay. What a shame! I'm a radio activist and don't know how to use the microphone. As I said, people wouldn't see or wouldn't characterize Graz as a city of the workers' movement. We had the example in one of the videos about Vienna, where they were singing the International. Like Vienna, for example, is much more connected with the workers' movement, with the labor movement. With the Red Vienna of the 20s and 30s, that's quite strong there till today. But if you go back in history, here in Graz, it's also a city of the workers' movement. You just have to take, for example, a look into the Arbeiterwille, the Workers' Will. That was the social democratic newspaper that was founded in 1890. And you will find a lot of traces of a movement who changed the world, actually, and also who changed that city. So if you would take a look in this newspaper, the Arbeiterwille, what would you find there? If you go back like to the early 20th century, you would find a lot about organizing on the workplace. That was very important that time, for sure. They were calling for meetings like almost every day. They gathered in restaurants and in pubs to get organized in all the different branches of economy. And this time also was a time of struggles. People went. There have been a lot of strikes in that time. People went on strike to fight for their rights, or to fight for higher wages and so on. And these struggles in that time, in the early 20th century in Graz, the struggles have been quite intense. There have been a lot of confrontations. Just to give you one example, in 1914, the tailor's assistants went on strike, and there also happened a case like that. One guy tried to kill one of the trade unionists, and it's interesting to take a look on that case, because this trade unionist, he survived, and they brought that guy, the assassin, to court. He confessed his crime, but he went free, because that was the atmosphere in the city. You can attack a trade unionist, and you don't have to fear to go to prison for that. So that was the situation here in Graz in the early 20th century. But I think it was not only about the struggles, about the strikes. For me, the real interesting thing about the workers' movement isn't so much about numbers, about the votes they had at the elections and things like that. For me, the real interesting thing about the workers' movement, and that's something you also can see here in the city, is the workers' movement, at its best to say, always tried to create a different world, you know, to create about a counter world to the existing one. That was their goal at that time. A lot of these ideas we are discussing now, like about cooperatives or community gardening and things like that, all these ideas are old ideas. They discussed these ideas in like 100 years ago in the workers' movement. Also here in Graz we had consumer cooperatives, producer cooperatives and things like that. The movement did a lot about education, culture and so on. They had their associations for theater, for music, for singing. Singing was also very important in the workers' movement. Maybe some part comes out of that. They did a lot on education. They had their evening classes. They tried to fight the influence of the Catholic Church in the school system. That was a very intense struggle in that time. Sports, for example, was very important. You know, in every city you got the workers' football clubs or the gymnastic clubs and all kind of these things. And we had these things here and we still have them here. I just want to give you one quote and maybe it makes something clear. It's a quote by Hans Riesel. Hans Riesel was quite an interesting guy. He was a radical, an anarchist in his early days, and later he became one of the leading social democrats. And he also was the founder of the Workers' Bicycle Club here in Styria. And when they founded the Workers' Bicycle Club, it still exists, more or less, he called the workers to leave the bourgeois bicycle clubs. He called them, come on and join the bicycle club of your own class. Come on and join the cavalry of the proletariat. That was the word he used for that. So what you can see is that this movement really tried to create another world. And this attempts to do something different covered the whole life. And also death. They had their own association for funerals, for sure. It was very important to fight the Catholic Church in the city. So that was more or less the situation in the early 20th century. Now I want to move to the year of 1918, or let's say to this period, like 1918 is more simple, this period of 1917 to 1920, 21. You know, these years, they are a massive rupture in world history. You know, you have to remember that about 2/3 of the countries in the world, in Europe, in Asia, in Central America, changed their form of government in a very radical way. Monarchies became republics. In a lot of places, like in Russia and other places, there was a social revolution going on. The year 1918 here in Austria also began with struggles. We saw in January 1918, we saw the biggest strike in Austrian history. In November of 1918, they declared the Democratic Republic. And then, and that's quite interesting, I think, afterwards, after November 1918, there was kind of radicalization going on, here, especially here in Graz. It's interesting to see that at the manifestations in February 1919, they almost stopped the Social Democrats, the famous ones, they stopped them to talk at manifestations, and people applauded to, for example, the communist agitators, which had much more radical demands and so on. So there was a kind of radicalization going on, and you can see that also in the Bloody Saturday, as it was called. It was the 22nd of February in 1919. I think nobody here in town knows about the Bloody Saturday. It's really kind of hidden history. But on that day, the communists were calling for a manifestation here in town. And if you are reading the police files of these days, you can see that the authorities really got in panic. They really thought, now this manifestation could be the beginning for something more, for a revolution. You always have to keep in mind the context, you know, what's going on in the world. You got, in these days, the Soviet Republic in Munich, in Budapest, all of you know what's going on in Russia and so on. And so the authorities here in Graz really thought, okay, 22nd of February is the day where it starts here. What did they do? The authorities, the mayor of Graz, he forbid all public gatherings. They mobilized the police, the students, armed students. They got some more police from Lower Austria. They erected barricades at the main bridge. They brought some machine guns there and so on. It's interesting, afterwards they claimed the communists for what happened on that day, but the communists didn't want the provocation and went outside of the city. But then there have been clashes in the city at the Südtiroler Platz near the Kunsthaus. Some of you maybe know that place. And okay, there are a lot of details. I don't want to talk about the details, but at the end of the day there have been 4 people killed because the students, people think that it has been the students, opened fire at the workers. So they killed 4 people and a lot of people got injured. So what I wanted to do with this story about the Bloody Saturday here in Graz is just to give you an impression about the atmosphere in the city of that time, and also to see how history, the local history, is linked to what's going on a broader level, on a global level. Because in these revolutionary times there was also a lot of impact, a lot of influence from the struggles on other places. So that was 1918. We make a step forward to 1968. If you talk about 1968 with people here in Down, people will tell you, oh yeah, there wasn't going on a lot here in Down, you know. We didn't have barricades like in Paris, we didn't have sit-ins like in Berkeley or something like that. And they were right, you know. There's a book about the May 68 in Vienna, and the subtitle of that book is Hot 15 Minutes. And for Graz, maybe it's 1 hot minute or something like that. So that's right, there have been some action, some mobilizations and so on, but it's true, there haven't been a lot of things in these days. But the interesting thing at the same time is that everybody would agree, and I think also everybody here in the audience, that the world changed in a radical way since 1968. So the question, or what we should ask ourselves is, how did it happen? If there have been no struggle, how could the world change like that? And we shouldn't underestimate the transformations since that time. You know, just talk to your mother, to your grandfather, or whoever about life and work in the 60s and 70s, and it's obvious how life and work changed in the last decades. Immanuel Wallerstein called it the world revolution of 1968, and he said that it was much, much more transformative than 1917 or 1989, and I agree on that. So there's still a question, how can society change if there are no struggles who provoke that change? And I think at one hand we shouldn't forget the capitalist mode of production is always a world system. So all the things which are happening here in Graz and Styria, they are not isolated from what's going on somewhere else. So if there is a change on a global level, there is some impact of that also on a local level. And the other thing is, in that time, I think we can see a lot of forms of hidden resistance. There in the actual discourse, there are some tools how you can understand it, like James Discartes is talking about weapons of the weak, or Raúl Sibeki, the author from Uruguay, is talking about. He's not talking about social movements. He's talking about movements, about societies in movement. And I think these are tools to understand these struggles, these forms of resistance on a micro level in a better way. And I think we still don't have a good understanding of how society works, and especially how society changes. And in these days we can see a lot of this resistance on a micro level, sometimes on an individual level, you know, not in an organized collective way. Because, you know, it's not always about the numbers of people in the street while a society changes. Like, To give you one example, in the last years there have been much more students in the streets than in the 60s, but the students in the 60s had much more, or changed society in a much more radical way than the students did in the last years. Or to give you another example, here in Austria in the last weeks or months, we had a lot of scandals about living conditions in children's homes in that time, in the 60s and 70s. You know, these children's homes which were run by the state or by the Catholic Church, and there have been terrible things going on. You know, there are stories about forced labor, about sexual abuse, about violence and so on. And we don't have these children's homes anymore. They are gone. I hope so. We don't know what comes in the future, but they are gone. You know, they closed them in the 70s and so on. And the question is why? How did that happen? There has been a movement, a visible movement against these children's homes, but it was quite small. But at the same time, I think there have been a lot of resistance against these institutions. You know, hundreds or thousands of these kids were just running away from these homes, trying to get out of it. They were resisting inside these institutions. There have been families, friends, also the people who have been working there who were fighting these institutions. We don't know the stories about their resistance and about their struggles and about their fights, but they won, you know? They stopped most of these institutions. And so I think also this kind of resistance, which is not visible for us, or usually is not visible for us, is very important for a society that is in a process of change. And that's something we see here in Graz also in the 60s, in 1968. And I think the struggles in that time are so important also for our actual situation, because these struggles smashed the Fordist mode of accumulation and regulation. I will talk about that a bit later. Okay, so I had 1918, 1968. Now I'll try to talk about 2018, and that's a bit difficult. You know, I'm an historian, so maybe I can talk about the past, but can I talk about the future? But I hope that at the end of my talk, it will become a bit clearer what I want to say. I want to start talking about 2018 and the actual situation where we are living in at the moment. I want to start with a short overview about what's going on in that city where you are now for the next week or 2 weeks. In the last years, we saw a lot of protests here in the streets of Graz, of Styria. You can't compare it with what's going on in the southern countries of Europe or Northern Africa. But it's really interesting to see that also here in Austria, for example, the periods between the struggles, between the protests, between the movements, they become shorter and shorter. But as I said, I just want to give you an overview. In 2009 and 10, we had the big student movement again, like in a lot of other countries. Last year, a year ago, we had the first strike of the metal workers for a very long time here in the country. Here in Graz, there's a squatter movement again in the last, or it was active again in the last years, something we didn't have since the 80s. At anti-fascist manifestations, or you saw some of these pictures during the lecture of Herwig, at anti-fascist manifestations, there are hundreds of people now on the street. In the 90s, it was like, yeah, a few. We also had, a few months ago, a year ago, we had a very strong protest against the coal power plant. Here in town, there's an ongoing protest against the hydropower plant. The next manifestation will be in about a week. If you are still here, then you can join it. And last but not least, but I think it's the most important and the most important protest and struggle that is still going on, is that in last year, in 2011, we had the biggest protest here in the city since 1950. Several times there have been 10 to 15,000 people on the streets protesting against the regional government, against their policies, against the cuts they are doing in education, in social services, and so on. And that's really, really interesting to see, and something really new and great thing that is going on here. You know, if 10, 15,000 people on the street here in Graz, that's really impressive. And, okay, so I will move on very quick now. I think I got 5 minutes. I think the really important thing is to bring this local protest or to link it with the things that are going on a global level. And a few thoughts about where we are now. First thing is, for me, it's important how to understand the crisis. You know, people, in my opinion, the crisis we are living through now, it didn't start in 2008, it started in the 70s. The struggles, as I said, of the 60s and 70s smashed the Fordist regime, and afterwards we saw attempts to solve the crisis. And in 2008 it became clear that it doesn't work, or it was just possible to postpone the big crash for a few years. People usually compare the actual crisis with the crisis in the 30s. I wouldn't do that. If you try to find a similar situation in history, you should go back to the 18th century, the time before the American and French Revolution. There have been quite turbulent times because all the concepts, all the ideas which constitute our modern world have been invented in these years. So, for example, the nation state, or the first modern constitutions, or the idea of separation of power, liberal democracy, all these things are ideas of the 18th century. The 18th century saw some very important processes, like in Europe disappeared the last non-state populations, the Industrial Revolution is going on. Also through the revolutions, especially the French Revolution, till the French Revolution, all the political mass movement expressed aspirations in religious terms. Afterwards, it's different, so that's a real rupture again. Or also, if you try to understand the society in a more Foucauldian way, to say, all the institutions that constituted disciplinary society were invented in the 18th century, like the first modern hospital, the first modern prison, the first modern factory. It's really interesting to see that all these things happen within a few years. And all these ideas, concepts, institutions are gone. They are dead, and we shouldn't talk about them anymore. You know, just to give you one example, the nation state or liberal democracy, you just have to take a look on the policies of the European Union or the Troika, what they are doing. You know, they give a shit on these things, on liberal democracy, on separation of power and things like that. But I think, you know, that's okay. It's really okay, because in my opinion, you know, it's the end of the world as we know it. And we should really feel fine about that, because we always criticized this political and economic system. So that is, and I think I should come to an end. So that's maybe the essence of my talk, that we are in a situation that is similar to the 18th century, to that time before the American and French Revolution. So in my opinion, it's totally stupid, it's cynical, and it's inhuman in a way, to try to save the world with these old ideas, with these old concepts. So just forget about the nation state, forget about liberal democracy, forget about, or don't fool around in the ruins of the past. I think it's much, much more important now to take a look on the struggles which are taking place already now, on the concepts and ideas which are developed there, and we should get prepared for the coming revolution of 2018. You know, I'm not sure about this date, so don't come to me in 2018 and say to me, you've been wrong, but I'm really sure about one thing, that we are on the eve of something totally new, and yeah, we will see in the next years, and yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leo. We have, I guess, 2 minutes for questions, because now if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I cannot properly see. Otherwise, we will continue our Graz specific thing, and we will continue with Michael Zingerle, who will also analyze the situation in Graz, but more specific, the relation of art and politics, artists and politics, the idea of the avant-garde also coming up in the 60s, how it developed here, and what was the major works, exhibitions, and things to see in the city. So thank you very much.